Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first ever episode of Industry Insights, a brand new talk show that aims to give you a deeper look into the esports industry. My name is Benjamin Hodge McKenna, and I'll be your host. And today I am joined by freelance director and technical director JD Wu. How are you doing?
I'm doing phenomenal, Ben. Thanks for having me. I really do appreciate you guys reaching out and bringing me on for this. I'm super excited. I also have a little friend over here, my cat. She's also really excited to be a part of the broadcast. So you know what? You might have two guests in a little bit.
Yeah, well, potentially, you're definitely going to be seeing at least a tail going past every now and then. I'm certainly expecting, but yeah, thank you for coming on. And I know a lot of people are going to be keen to hear more about what it's like to be a director in the esports space. So, to start off with things, why don't you generally introduce yourself, JD? Tell us a bit more about who you are and what your roles are within esports.
Yeah. So hi, I'm JD. I do directing and technical directing within esports. Um, More to be specific within esports broadcast and production within the live environment, not necessarily in post production. So a lot of the live streams, whether it's a talk show, a tournament, here we are, she's back, a tournament or um, a podcast, uh, or really just a pre-show or any of those, I would be, either directing or technical directing, which is more so using the production switcher, and pretty much what my role is what I'm supposed to do in either of those two different positions in the crew is just taking that kind of creative vision from that the producers have of what that show is, and kind of just executing it and delivering on it within like a live environment. So um usually it's like having a lot of meetings and having a lot of pre-production days of just kind of getting aligned with uh the creatives, or the people who are really um driving the ship. And
Yeah.
then in the moment and on the days and leading up to it, it's kind of my job to kind of help deliver that vision, and help deliver that vision, and really just hit the goals that they kind of want for that product.
Yeah, absolutely. Your cat seemingly enjoying
Yeah,
being
she
equal a
loves
part of
this.
attention as well as you are. But you mentioned briefly as a technical director that it's sort of your job to hit the buttons. Could you just explain a little bit more, just generally, what the responsibilities are as a technical director?
Yeah, for sure. Is technical directing. You're working within a production switcher, and not just to throw too much craft jargon. It's you're working within a very like limited resource environment, trying to create unlimited effects and video
Yeah,
effects for a production. So whether it's making a two box, or whether it's making a cool in-game overlay that has like different views of different in-game observer feeds. It's kind of the technical director's job to help create that, and then when it comes to actual show day, it's their job to kind of go between all these different sources, um, and kind of follow along with the story, and just make it as seamless as possible and not draw any attention that it's actual human going between all these different sources.
yeah, absolutely. Sounds like an interesting task and one that might need a little bit of creativity and working on the fly
Yes.
within that broadcast studio. So I'm very keen to speak a little bit more about that with you later in our broadcasting segment. But for now, let's get to know you a little bit more generally as a person. So what kind of games are your favorite ones to play? What do you like to kick back and relax with on the gaming front?
Oh man. So I do play a lot of games. So I guess to start off, what I played like last night, I was playing TFT. I played some Animal Crossing, and this is my kind of like wind down, kind
Yeah.
of start to relax my brain a little bit games. Um, but when I'm like really kind of feeling it in the middle of the day, when I'm a little bit more awake, um, a little bit more capable as an individual on the internet. I usually do a little bit more competitive stuff. So I've been doing Valorant recently. I've been playing Apex. I play League of Legends. Not so much. I dabble in it every now and then. I played a ranked game last night. I won that,
Yeah.
by the way, but it wasn't a great KDA. But I got the win. Um, but yeah, it's League of Legends, Apex, Valorant. I was playing Rainbow Six Siege. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Just most games I usually play.
Yeah, all of the competitive titles by the sound of things. And
Yeah.
does that transition well into over what you like to watch? It doesn't have to be esports wise necessarily, but do you find yourself watching those titles more as well?
Yeah, I think that I think that it's just by the nature of, me as a individual, I'm super competitive person, and then I'm a very curious individual too. So when I play any game, I'm always looking to see what the top level is doing, to see, like, why they're doing it. Am I capable of doing such a
Yeah.
thing? Like, I can't necessarily one tap five members of the enemy team, but I definitely can figure out, like, some really cool, like, smoke lineups or
Mhm.
whatever, from watching, like, these high level tournaments. So that definitely, I would say that that is a for the most part. I think that there isn't usually a esports. Sometimes I'll tune into Rocket League because I think it's just a good time. And
Yeah.
I don't really play too much of that. I've played maybe, like, 3 or 4 times with friends, but Rocket League esports, it's definitely fun. It's fast and it's
Yeah.
fun.
Well, there aren't too many Rocket League fans on my course, but the few that they are certainly fanatic about the game. And talking more about the esports side of things, then we were talking a little bit about this before the broadcast started. But what are some of your favorite events to watch at the moment as a viewer?
So in terms of events, I'm gonna turn into online events, because just to be
Nice.
more specific, because in the current state, we're definitely more in the online world. But right now, I've been really digging the R6 Pro League.
Hmm.
Um, the R6 competitive streams have been really fun to watch. I think that um, for what the developers are kind of like assisting with in the storytelling of their esports broadcast is, like, phenomenal. I hate to say Sims and esports within the same sentence,
Hmm.
but the Sims view that the R6 observer client has is, like, one of the most beautifully executed things I've ever seen uh from a developer, putting that into an observer client to adapt to what the game is by
Hmm.
nature, of, like, these heavy setups on a pre-attacking phase. That it's such a great thing to watch, that I find it to be so fun and engaging as a viewer, just to see, like, um, the story of the actual match is
Yeah.
being so well supported within the observer client. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, and I know that some of the people I've worked with on Rainbow Six broadcast in the past are very happy that the spectator UI has now been updated for Rainbow Six. It just makes it a lot cleaner and easier to see things going forward. And moving on then to your journey personally within esports and the industry, we're going to switch over to that category of speaking now. When is it exactly that you first became aware of esports?
Um, it's such a weird, it's a really good question, by the way, really great, really good question. And it's kind of weird for me, because the word esports, like, when I was kind of discovering it, the word esports didn't exist.
Hmm.
So there were all these different terms for what it was, but kind of like when I first started to kind of get more into competitive gaming, where I saw it more as, like, kind of the esports identity it is today, was when I was playing League of Legends in college, and I started up my team of, online group of people, and we were competing in, like, go for lols,
Yeah,
for $20, 14 hours a day, 20
nice.
bucks if you win, but 14 hours a day. straight, just grinding through matches. And then when you win, you're like, "Oh my god, we get $100." And then it's like, wait, divided by 5 people, and then you're like, "Wait, the math, this is all right, sure. I mean, it's some money." And then you'll end up getting it like 3 months later or something. But like that was kind of my first glimpse of it. But I've definitely, you know, kind of before then, I was kind of like dabbling in, the like CS 1.6, doing like these private servers and doing small like skirmishes and stuff like that. But nothing like too crazy up until League of Legends Go for lols, which was definitely a experience.
What year do you think it was that you were competing in those tournaments?
Oh my gosh. 2010, 2011, I think. So yeah, it was God, I feel really old.
Yeah.
That was a rough question. That was a good question, but a rough question for me.
A good
Yeah,
long
that
while
was
ago.
yeah, it's almost 10 years. Oh man. Yeah, 10 years ago.
Yeah,
Oof, that was
indeed.
rough
Well,
to say.
certified industry veteran then. And as a player, did you ever make it any further than just playing those $100 tournaments?
Yeah, yeah. So, it as you kind of, at least what it was back then, it was a little more Wild West. So, you compete in the Go for Lols, you keep competing, and then you kind of get noticed, and then you get brought into an invitational. So, I pretty much competed in Go for Lols, and then kind of like doing these, um, I think it was called like the Mobifier Championship Series, and then I did some like IPL qualifiers, and then some like MLG things every now and then, kind of like leading up to it. And then I
Mhm.
did pretty much, I think the peak of where I competed was the qualifier for the first LCS split. Um where I didn't win, I didn't qualify, but I was playing under the team that eventually turned into Velocity,
Right.
which is, a very prestigious North American esports organization that completely blew up the whole ecosystem of esports. Um, but yeah, I was playing under the team Dirtnap Gaming at the time, and then we were going through the qualifiers. We unfortunately didn't qualify, and then I kind of ever since then I kind of started competing a little less and less, and then I started to look more at what I could be doing outside of being a player. So I started looking at more of a coach role or analyst role, and then eventually transitioning into um, a on-air talent role for a little bit, where I was kind of like a host, kind of talking with pro players about like um, different things that they could do. That they do within game that make them such experts at their like play.
Mhm.
Um, and then eventually transitioning into an observer for League of Legends. So I started doing in-game camera work, and then slowly, integrating into the other parts of broadcast, and then here I am.
Yeah, indeed. And when you were looking at those initial roles, then you mentioned you tried things out as coaching and on-air talent. Were those the first things you were looking at? Were those the segments that you wanted to go into, or had you always been looking at trying to get into the production side of things?
So when I was in college, so here's a disclaimer: stay in school. But
Yeah.
Um, when I was in college playing, trying to compete and be a pro within League of Legends, I actually ended up dropping out my last semester to kind of really pursue it. Stay in school.
Yeah.
So I dropped out my last semester, and I was my major at the time when I was in college was cinema. So I was definitely more within the realm of trying to do like something within entertainment and film, but then in like more looking at it as like a director within cinema. So I was totally open to the idea of doing some sort of director, almost uh, kind of like cinematic feeling, like of creative juices
Yeah.
within maybe even in a live environment, as opposed to more of like the feature film style.
Yeah, indeed, and I think that's pretty interesting actually that you've just transitioned straight over from cinema into esports straight rather than I know a lot of people perhaps looked at sports broadcasting first and then transitioned over. So do you think that there were any skills that you learned during university or perhaps during your playing career that now help you as a member of that production team?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, as I think one of the biggest skills you can have kind of going into esports is at least like you get like you for sure you gotta play the game, right?
Yeah.
I think that one of the biggest things, that I would advocate for is like anytime like you if you're interested in an esport, like play that game until like you feel like you absolutely know everything because like and even if you come out the other end being like, well, still bronze, that's totally fine. It's more so like being aligned with the community, and you understand the community sentiment, like especially within broadcast, there's so many things where you're kind of showing on screen, that to someone who isn't necessarily like aligned with the community,
Hmm.
viewers might be like completely off put and like almost like offended. So it's like it's super important to be like to be a player as well, and just to be aligned with and almost like kind of celebrating just the esports tournament or like the talk show or whatever the broadcast is with the viewers. So you're almost like with a viewer putting on the show for
Yeah.
yourself, you know?
Yeah, and so obviously speaking at length there about how important having that in-game knowledge is, are there any other attributes if you were looking if you had your choice to pick out the perfect production teams, what other attributes outside of in-game knowledge would you be looking for in those crew members?
Um, so really good question. That would definitely be my number one.
Sure.
Is you have to be super passionate about the game, or you have to be not necessarily super passionate, but you have to be like aligned culturally with the viewer base. I think that that's like a super important thing. But if I couldn't say that, I would totally say um just a good I hate to just throw like the most general thing out there, but a good can do attitude, and
Sure.
I think willing to solve problems in just a cool steady head. I think especially within a live environment, if I'm with a production crew, if something goes crazy wrong, the last thing we need is complete anarchy within the control room
Yeah.
or the Discord server or whatever. The most I would want is like, something goes wrong, everyone's like, that's not good. Let's fix it. That would probably be my thing, is just a group of problem solvers who are also like understand what good calmness and um a lightheartedness to a broadcast, especially within broadcast. Lightheartedness is like one of the best things, is like because you're in a room with a bunch of people for like 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day. So let's be cool and get along and be happy, you know?
Yeah. So those are the kinds of things that you'd be looking for in a crew. What about some of the stuff that you maybe don't like after working in those control centers? What are some of the things that you've seen that you definitely like to tell people to try and avoid?
um, let's see. So there's definitely the extremes on the other end where you have like the screamers or the yellers, or like pretty much the exact opposite of pretty much what I was saying of what I would want. Like
Hmm.
I would want like lightheartedness and things like that. I wouldn't necessarily want people who were taking it um super seriously, where like they will personally get like very upset at others, right? I
Yeah.
think that that's like one of the worst things you can have within a broadcast environment, especially live broadcast environment, where it's like you don't want to create this kind of like toxic dynamics between members of your crew. So I would definitely say like that's probably like the highest thing, is like taking things personally and kind of like reflecting that on others.
And I suppose just briefly, obviously, you're going to be working incredibly long hours with these people, right? And in incredibly high pressure situations. So, how important is it to you that everybody in the production team is sort of getting along and, is not necessarily has to be best friends with each other, but at least is able to get along in a social setting as well. Do you think that is a benefit to the production side of things?
I think, yeah, I think it's that's one of the things that I feel personally, like when I come, it's hard to say because like when I watch a broadcast, I'm like, oh, they're having fun. And I think that like the viewers can actually feel when a production crew, they're all having fun and they're kind of like going through the things, and they're like a pretty tight knit crew. Um, I think that at least from a viewer point of view, I can see when broadcasts are having fun, and then they are working through their show in a very like productive and creative way. And then as a crew member, um, I would say that it's super important because once people start to get along, then you can start to collaborate. And then that by nature will make everything kind of easier, and you don't have to say too many things that
Hmm.
would be um you know kind of uh that would be like kind of things that like you don't need to say like too many of like the things that like are kind of goes unsaid.
Yeah,
And like, do we need to bring in a graphic here? Yeah, we probably
yeah.
do.
You
if,
get
if we're
that
talking about,
chemistry with the team.
let's see the format or whatever of like a tournament, like we're gonna see a full screen too. So like having that chemistry is like super important. Um, so I would definitely say that like once you kind of have like a good collaborative bunch, it just opens up so much more in for the ceiling of like what you can do creatively and how much more
Mhm.
you can kind of fit into a broadcast that like the viewers would also love.
Yeah, and when you're trying to build that team chemistry in the broadcast room, can it be difficult sometimes when working with a mixture of people from esports backgrounds and traditional sports backgrounds rather? Can there be some friction there sometimes?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that there's always a little bit of like um I wouldn't necessarily say friction, but there's misunderstandings.
Hmm.
I think that, and that comes with like most things in life, is that like, you come from a different time, a different place, a different upbringing, and like you see the world just differently than others, right? And I think that um especially within my role, usually I just try to unify people within the commonalities that we all have, and kind of have people driving more on the show. And then slowly, if let's say they aren't too familiar with esports, and like they just think they're like kids and like living in their parents house in their basements, and not like these millionaire athletes that some of them are. um so I think that just having everybody unify over like the commonality that we're putting on a broadcast that's showcasing some sort of talent, and then kind of pushing forward, and slowly everybody starts to understand the scope of these things. And like,
Yeah,
those like random like catchy sentences of like, oh yeah, like the Fortnite kid, he won like $1 million, or like, oh yeah, these teams, they're actually living on their own, and then they go into a training facility to start their workday, right? Like I
yeah.
think that it's slowly, you slowly kind of like level up and educate others of the space. But yeah, I would definitely say that the different viewpoints of what esports is definitely one of the kind of hurdles that you kind of have to work with, because especially because within production, there's such a giant pool of like who like there's a giant pool of like camera operators, there's a giant pool
Yeah.
of graphics operators and graphic producers and tape tape producers, and there's such a giant pool. And just like having uh that many people, and who come from certain areas and certain like, oh, I'm a tennis guy, oh, I'm a football guy, oh, I'm an American football guy, like that's that's something that uh is just by nature one of the challenging parts of any broadcast, I
Yeah.
think.
And yeah, I definitely think so. And I think say what you will about Fortnite, but it has done an excellent job of
Yeah.
increasing the awareness of esports to people who otherwise would have had no idea
Yeah.
what it was. And I think, whatever you think about the game, at least it's done that service to the community. So
Yeah.
we spoke
Sure.
a little bit about your journey into the production side of things, going from a player into those coaching slash on talent roles, and then into observing. Imagine, if you can, rewind all the way back to being in your final semester of university, but it would be in the modern climate. So you're sat there now in 2020 in your final semester, and you've looked at esports and you've thought, "Oh, I really, really want to work in there." What would be some of the
Yeah.
first steps you think people in that position should take to try and get into the industry?
I would so I would if I were to go back in time, I would totally stay in school. Stay in school, everyone. But if I were to go back in time, I think the if I were to try to do it, I'd probably do it a very similar way. Just because I have such a competitive drive, I would probably want to still go through as a player into the ecosystem. And like,
Hmm.
I think some people find it a very ambiguous way of being kind of recognized as a pro player, but it's pretty simple. You grind the public ladder, you get your name out there. You just have to keep grinding it and keep putting your name out there, and also you have to kind of promote yourself too as
Yeah.
someone. But I know that all of us aren't necessarily, challenger level players or the top level players out there. So if like, let's say if I didn't want to go through as a pro player, I would probably push myself to get involved within the esports system, whether it's trying to manage like my college team or trying to organize my esports club if I'm looking at more like infrastructure stuff. But if I wanted to do more things like production, I'd probably be putting on things like this, where it's like, you're hosting a broadcast and you're just trying to like just flex those muscles of kind of like the creative live broadcast kind of workflow. Um, it would definitely be just getting involved and just trying to like make things. I think that
Hmm.
that's like one of the biggest things is that you just need to take a step. And then whether it's like, just doing a quick little like a little talk show or a podcast with friends, or it's like trying to put on like a college tournament for this and then trying to broadcast that out. I think that despite the viewers, you like who if you're doing that or participating in that, I think that that's such a valuable skill to learn. And it only puts you kind of like ahead of the curve of like um the kind of problems and hurdles that a lot of like live broadcast crews like run into when they start to enter the esports
Yeah.
like broadcasting workflow.
Yeah. And I personally know a lot of people now who are sort of taking that train of advice on. They're getting involved, volunteering, trying to put their own tournaments and things like that on. And this might be a slightly more difficult question to answer, but how do you think somebody who is, currently volunteering their free time, they're running these free leagues as production, how do you think they can get it from the spot where they're just doing it on a volunteer basis to be able to transition that then into paid work and some kind of a career?
Yeah, totally. I think that the so I'll speak first in terms of esports live broadcast and production, and then I can speak more towards like esports as like a whole.
Sure.
If we have other people who are looking into like more infrastructure kind of like project lead stuff for within the esports like giant umbrella.
Yeah.
But within, at least in terms of live production, I would say doing things that aren't esports first, just to gain perspective. Because I as much as like, we want to be like, I'm a esports broadcast person, or I'm an esports person, and like I'm only going to do esports because like that's what interests me. I think that there's so much value to gain um, from looking at things from other perspectives. So even though like you might be esports at like heart and stuff, I think that there is value on, entering into a different production and just seeing how they do what they do, and then kind of applying that same kind of ideology of like, oh, so now that like I've kind of like learned all the tricks of like this sort of broadcast, like let's say football for example. Oh, I've learned all the tricks that kind of like football uses within their broadcast. Like how can I kind of take that and make esports like level up?
Yeah.
So I think that that's like a great way where you can, within at least live production, you can take that drive and then all this volunteering and experience, and then sort of enter yourself into roles within that are already currently laid out, um, within the broadcast world. So whether it's news, whether it's live sports, I know there isn't too much of it right now, but news, talk shows, uh, entertainment. I know that all these are kind of like way different than esports, but I totally think that there's massive value that you can get from outside. And because I know that one of the biggest things is that as esports is kind of growing, it's becoming more and more difficult because everyone's like, "What's your experience? Like, are
Yeah.
you like the guy to bring in? Like, you seem kind of new to this." So, like, the most you can do is have your interest in it, and then try to get this craft experience from places where there is like availability, and that you can prove to yourself you can create that kind of like um work record of
Yeah.
like just saying like, hey, like I put in the hours, like I know these things and I have these skills, right? Like I've proven that within this environment. Now let me show you within this environment which I'm super passionate about. So that's within live production. Sorry, I'm taking a little bit longer with this, but
That's fine.
that's within live production. But things outside of that, like let's say we're talking about um, team managing, or like let's say uh, if you're working in finance but you love esports, like you can do any of those things outside, right? Like esports is just a giant um, umbrella of like businesses and career paths that you can choose from, and all of that applies into any, literally any other thing besides maybe like an observer.
Yeah.
I think an observer is like that might be the one very unique role that like kind of works. You can be like maybe a cameraman for something else, but you're still working within the game. So for observers, just keep observing, and then I think that you can do a lot of things that revolve around observing, and then you know you can observe.
Yeah, that's good advice. I
Um,
think a lot of people don't necessarily sometimes consider going outside of the industry to develop that experience. So I feel like that's certainly something worthwhile to consider for everybody watching if you do want to make your way into this industry. And we do want to talk a bit about now your esports broadcasting and a little bit more technical questions about the production side of things. But before we do, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget that we are doing a Q&A at the end of this talk. So if you have any questions at the moment, please submit them into the chat. They will be reviewed. And if they're pretty good, they're probably going to be asked at the end. So if you do have any questions, make sure to submit those now. And let's now have the talk about your career at more in production and slightly more in depth on that side of things. So we briefly mentioned that you're a director and a technical director, and we've spoken a little bit briefly about what some of your responsibilities are. Could you give us a little bit more information about both of those roles and how a technical director is different from a director in the responsibilities that it includes?
Totally. So, at first, I guess I'll start off with technical directing, because I think that as a director, it's more you're almost like you're pulling from all these different places and working with a bunch of people to help create the final vision, right? But technical director is just kind of one of the avenues that the director can kind of pull from and collaborate with to help deliver on that vision. So I'll start off with technical directing. So depending on like what the the responsibility is, or what you're currently kind of jumping into as a technical director, um, it could be like one of two different things. You're jumping into an already existing workflow where you're kind of hopping in and you're kind of adapting and learning how they do things, and then your job is to integrate yourself into the team and be and understand what has currently been laid out by the previous technical director, and help deliver that, and maybe even add something with a new perspective. And that's all usually based within the production switcher. Um, what is laid out, right? Whether it's a bunch of, I'm going to try to not use terms,
Sure.
but what any of the internal memory on the switcher uh, of how these different effects look, how they interact with one another. Does this all of the different animations for these effects? Does one come full? Does one fly out? All the different like wipes and transitions, um, all kind of like they will already exist on the board, and you're kind of like locating them and trying to go through the show in your head of like how is the show going to play out and what are the things that I'll probably need to like look out for along the way. Like if I go to this one effect, can I go off of the effect to this effect, or do I need to like create some sort of workaround to do that? And a lot of it is like kind of more kind of craft experience where and I so if you aren't um looking to do technical directing, I'm just going to throw out a bunch of words right now just for the sake of
Sure.
explaining it the best I can for people who are interested in technical directing. So there are a lot of times where you're working with so many keyers within a production switcher, and you're working on multiple MEs where there's keyers on those MEs, right? So a lot of it is how you can allocate your keyers to its maximum potential and efficiency at the time. So it's kind of like where you'd play like the best way I can explain it is you're playing that the floor is lava game. You played it as
Sure.
a kid, right?
Yeah.
Playing the floor is lava game, you have a mat in front of you and a mat that you're currently on. So your job is to make the most out of those two mats as possible, right? So you're constantly recycling what you're using to create the next step to go to.
Mhm.
So you can have four mats, but if you use three mats to make one really cool um, thing, then you only have one mat left. So it's a very weird example I just did, but that's probably the best way I can explain it. But it's about efficiency and making it as easy and painless as possible within the actual show day, right? Um, so that's if you're entering into a already laid out show, is
Yeah.
like you're kind of adapting like that. Um, but if you're entering into a show where you're creating this what it looks like, you're creating the effects, you're helping deliver on what this esports is or this production is. Um, a lot of it's working closely with the creatives on it, the producer, the director, any of the leads who are in charge of like what they see it looking like, and you kind of help deliver that with them. um so it's in similar to what I said before, it's all about getting as much as you can out of what little you have.
Yeah.
So just doing that, create and just laying it out, and then going through every step, and then going from one step to another, or going from point A to point F, just to see if you can do that connection and it doesn't break the show. um
Yeah, indeed. And it sounds a little bit like, I think you summarized it really well. At its core, it sounds like making the smallest amount of buttons possible do the most things on the actual
yes.
broadcast. When you boil it down to its fundamental elements so that an idiot like me can understand, that makes it, that puts it into a lot better context for me. So that sounds like it can be challenging at times and a lot of creativity required. And I imagine a lot of pre-production work goes into that as well. So when you are looking at working in a technical director role, let's say for example you have a tournament coming up this weekend, what is some of the work that you'd have to do before the broadcast? What are the kinds of things that you're doing while the broadcast is live, and then what are some of the things that you have to do after that broadcast is over?
Yeah, so in terms of pre-production, it really depends on what things we're adding for this week. If it's like already existing broadcast, are we adding new segments for the pre-show before the match, or are we adding new um sponsor obligations to the show where we need to create this sort of commercial look or this sort of effect to help deliver on the sponsor obligation? um and then if that's as far as it is within the pre-show, like within the pre-production days. and of course, making sure you have everything loaded, making sure everything's not broken. I think that's one of the main things as a technical director is you literally, especially within esports, there's so many things that can go wrong. Not to scare anyone, but there's so many things that can go wrong technically within esports production. As compared to like live sports, right? Live
Yeah.
sports, you kind of just worry about your cameras, you worry about a couple of other things, but within esports technical directing, like you have to worry about all of these different video feeds and video signals coming in, like depending on like if the game supports an observer client or not, you might have to pull in 10 plus feeds, video game feeds, and their cameras, and that's just so many more things that you need to look out for. So you can work on a small esports show, but it can have 10 more cameras than a big live
Yeah.
sports game, which is such a crazy situation to be in. But that's kind of like the kind of one of the big hurdles as within esports production. So that's pre-production is making sure nothing's broken, and that means going through all of those different video signals that are coming in.
Yeah.
um, Within the show, your role as a technical director is to still make sure nothing breaks. That's probably your highest priority, is like if someone says, "Hey, do this," if it's going to break the show and ruin everything, don't do it.
Yeah.
Just say, "Hey, it's going to break the show and everyone's going to yell at us." Um so that's rule number 1, is don't make sure nothing breaks. And then also, as a technical director, your role within the show is to listen to the calls of the director and be um interpreting what he's saying and kind of delivering that.
Yeah.
So if he says, take camera 1 and then now push it back to um camera 3, then you would try to understand what he's saying, and whether it's like you guys have a meeting about this or had like a little chat about like what he means by that, but it would be you interpreting what he's saying and delivering that within what we're seeing on the actual show.
Yeah, and that's
um
where the chemistry with the director comes in, right? Because you
yeah.
need to know the nuanced language that he's using in order to be able to work properly.
Yeah, a lot of the times, for me, like when I hop into uh when I would do like technical directing, is like I would usually have a sit down kind of with the director and be like, "Hey, like when you say this, what do you mean? When you say this, what do you mean? When you say this, what do you mean?" Um and like I would always over communicate. I think that that's one of the most valuable things, is over communicate before show as much as you can, so that when you're in show, you lower the amount of chatter and people can think more clearly and be more prepared for what's the next step.
Sure.
um
And what are some of the things, the responsibilities that you have to deal with after the broadcast then? Any kind of reports that you have to fill out or anything like that?
Yeah, for the most part, it really depends on the kind of ask of the production, whether it's you're leaving certain video signals up to the different encoders that are going out around the world, or um, you need to stay around to build for the next day. But for the most part, a lot of it is once you get that "thanks for watching" slate up, like you're pretty much good to go for the
Yeah,
most part. The only caveat to that is like once that's up, then you just check in and see like, hey, what are we doing tomorrow? Are there any new things that we need to like look out for? And then depending on how the day's show, the current day's show went, you would probably be adapting and changing your effects and your like macros or whatever to call up these different things, to better do it for that the next day. Because a lot of the times, like when you build on a video production switcher, is like you try to be ready for any situation possible, which is impossible.
yeah,
So you can only do what you think is going to happen, So until you get into it, you really don't know what's going to come. As much as they talk about it, like things could feel out differently because it's live, you know? So
Yeah,
things can always feel out differently and play out completely differently than you expected. So I think at the end of the day, if you were satisfied with everything that happened and everything went according to plan, like pat yourself on the back and like, call it a day. But in some situations, like things are live, things are different, and like sometimes they don't necessarily pan out the way
yeah,
it was planned. So building more and adapting your show to what has manifested itself within that
yeah,
live show
yeah.
is super
Adaptation,
important.
I think, being the name of the game in terms of the after show work that you need to do. And in terms of the work that you have done on esports broadcasts, what are the kind of titles that you have worked on in the past?
Yeah, so I started off in League of Legends. So I did the what was called the North American uh League of Legends Championship Series. Now it's just called the League of Legends Championship Series or the League Championship Series. I'm not sure. I always just called it LCS. So I do so I've been doing LCS. I started out there. I did the academy. I helped do the EU academy back when we were doing it from LA. We were doing it across over the internet. Um, so I was doing a little bit of the EU Academy. I'm not sure what it's called now. Might be the challenge, like the it's
I'm not a League of Legends
it's
person
the it's the
personally,
the
so I'm
the
not
tier
too
just
familiar.
below the
Sure.
pros. But yeah, we were doing that. So I did League of Legends for a good while,
Mhm.
probably 6 years, and I'm still working with them. Um, but yeah, that's what I started off in, and then I started to dabble in other things. So I did a little bit of Call of Duty. I recently did Madden, which is American football. It's an American football
Yeah,
game. Um, I did that, and then I also did Apex Legends. So all of the Apex Legends online tournaments that they're doing recently, I'm doing. And then I did, every now and then, you always kind of do these like kind of random things. I did like a mobile car racing game one time, and then I've done a couple of random like entertainment things. Um, but yeah, I did Paladins as well. That was fun. That was like
sure.
my little taste of like a Overwatch ish kind of game. So that was a pretty fun interaction. But yeah, that's pretty much. But recently and the more current things, mostly Apex Legends, Madden, and League of Legends.
Just briefly, which one of the titles that you've worked on is the hardest to build
Oh,
a broadcast for from a production perspective?
so in terms of building, um, it's kind of a hard question because I feel like out of all of these, I've kind of been growing
Sure.
as I've been doing all these. So I've been taking tricks from one esports to another to kind of help deliver on what their goals are. But I think in terms of building, the Call of Duty event I did was probably the most like intricate kind of fun building because there wasn't an observer client and we wanted to have an observer director. We wanted to have like um an observer cutting between all these different feeds that didn't exist within because there wasn't a client. So
Do think you might be having some audio issues on your end at the moment, JD. I don't know if that might be caused by your headset or something, but perhaps we
okay.
can. Oh, there we are. We're back.
Okay.
You're just about back.
Okay. So I'll reverse it. I'll go back in time. I'll rewind just a little bit to um let's say
I think Observer
Call of
Director
Duty.
was one of the last words that we
Call
said.
of Duty. Yeah, so we're using two fully kitted out production switches, like super geared out, ready to go, and then we fully maxed out them just for this because it was um it was kind of like a marketing invitational tournament. So we had like 20 plus um game feeds that we were all ingesting onto a switcher. We were creating all the different effects and all the different looks. And then we were using this giant switcher to sub switch within the main production switcher, the main broadcast switcher. And then we were using also effects within that switcher to adapt what was being cut on the sub switcher. That was a super fun build, also a very challenging one. But with enough like pre-production days and enough like uh days leading up to it, like, anything's possible. So, we did that, and that was a really fun build. In terms of So that was in terms of building, but in terms
Mhm.
of kind of like live cutting, what was kind of like the more like engaging one, probably Madden, I would say, is like one of the ones that is like a little bit more active and a little bit more involved in terms of the live show,
Yeah,
because um I think that Madden has done a really cool thing where they've kind of conditioned their viewers to, and also it's kind of the nature of what a live sports game is that, you you do a play and then there's a break in play where they're choosing their next play from their playbook.
yeah,
um so during that time you'll cut out to a live shot of the player. So it's a very active way, because a lot of the times when you're in the game for a lot of esports productions, it's like you're kind of on the game, and the
mhm,
most you can kind of do is like bring in different picture in pictures of like, you know some guy's face reacting, or like here's like a cool graphic way that we can kind of tell the story, or
yeah,
cutting a player camera on the bottom. But Madden was one of the ones where it was a little bit more active. Like, you're going off of that, you're going to a full screen shot of like a player reacting or screaming or something, and then you cut to another player, and then you'll wipe to a replay, and then you're rolling the replay, you're watching that, and then you wipe back to gameplay just before the
yeah,
ball snaps. So it's a very kind of like active and fast paced, super fun show to cut.
yeah,
But that
indeed.
was probably the one where it's like the most for
Yeah,
sure.
sounds super entertaining to work with, and obviously must need a lot of different skill sets to be able to function it with. We are just going to go to a quick break, ladies and gentlemen, as we resolve some of these camera issues. Don't go anywhere, and we will be back shortly. We were just talking about your work within those esports titles, and you mentioned having worked alongside people from traditional sports backgrounds. How do you think that modern esports productions differ from traditional sports productions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, esports is there's so many things to hit on for the subject because it's such a um there's so many nuances to it, right? Working in terms of working with people from live sports, I think that it depends on a person to person basis, but I think that for the most part there's so much to learn from their point of view in terms of uh what's what's kind of like these tried and true methods of like what a broadcast looks like. I think that there's so much knowledge and uh workflow practices that you can learn and kind of pull from the live sports environment and adapt it to esports. Um, but I think that there are things as 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 esports is a new thing. I think that it does face scrutiny from
Yeah,
people, but I think that it's one of those things where it's like when I was trying to convince my parents like, oh, like I want to work in esports, like you have to like they're just like, wait, you just gonna play games all day? Or like to this day I think my parents actually like they sort of start to know what I'm doing, but they would like just tell their coworkers and tell their friends like, oh, like he just like makes games or
yeah,
something like that. Like that I think that there's such a ambiguous space of like what esports is and what gaming is, um that there's a some people are a little naive to the scope of what esports is, and
yeah,
I think that it's kind of like as people who are kind of pushing esports forward and like working within the system, uh I think it's important and kind of everyone's duty to like educate. I
yeah.
think that kind of
Absolutely.
like
Well,
it just like not necessarily like saying like, oh, like what you don't understand or things like that, but I think it's like slowly just like helping people get what esports is and the scope of it. Like as much as it might be silly to mention, it's like saying that these teams, like a lot of people think that these pro players still live at their parents' house, right? They don't know
yeah,
that these pro players are salaried employees of an organization where they have their own apartments, they have their own houses, and they drive into a training facility where they're practicing
yeah.
all
I
day,
mean,
and then they
my
end their
my grandmother can't even remember her own Facebook password, so trying to get her to understand what esports is a
yeah.
challenge that I'm not up to at all the times.
Yeah, I would say like a lot of it is kind of education, and it's like it's up to said individuals to either understand that or not
Mhm.
understand that. But the most we can do is try to um,
Yeah,
broaden horizons and give visibility and clarity to like
absolutely.
what everything is.
Yeah,
Um,
I definitely agree with you on that point. So, talking a bit more about working in the production room, you're on a live broadcast. It's going out to thousands of people. It's a high pressure situation to be in. How do you manage to cope with that pressure when you're working?
um, I just crumble. I just crumble and I fall apart and I just start crying. Um, but seriously, I think that it's one of those things that you slowly becomes you slowly get used to it. But like I mean to this day, like you know uh I've done the world's opening ceremonies. I've done these massive things with like huge viewer counts, and like to this day, I mean, I when I work on like any show, I get so nervous before we go on air. Every time it's like, you know, I'm like kind of a worry body. So even when as soon as the countdown goes on the encoder and it starts streaming out to the world, I start to freak out.
Yeah,
So, but the best you can do is, take a moment, understand that, what you're doing, like at least for me, like I'm doing what I love. Like I'm super passionate about this. It makes me super happy and I wake up every morning feeling super grateful that I'm in such a position to be like to be able to work on this and call it a job. Because like when I was trying to be a pro player, when I was like a little kid in middle school, playing like Diablo 2 and like grinding that and doing the cow level like over and over again for whatever item I was trying to grind. Um, like I never thought that I'd be waking up and just being like, okay, time to do this. Which is it's such a phenomenal thing. So I think just reminding myself that like I'm super lucky and super blessed, and just staying focused on what's next. I think that that's
Yeah.
kind of like to find like some sort of like calmness in the moment of being live is just say what's next, how do we get there, what do we need to do, and you just keep doing that, you keep taking that step forward and like what's next, and then all of a sudden you're done with the show, and there isn't a what's next, there's like, oh wow, great job everyone, we did it. And like that's kind of like how I kind of keep focused on what's the kind of pressure of the live broadcast.
Yeah. Absolutely. Great advice to give. And now looking into the modern climate, you mentioned working on those online Apex Legends broadcasts. What's changed in your role now that all of these broadcasts is headed online? Is much different from the production perspective?
um a little bit, yeah, a little bit. I think there's there's a lot more that can go wrong that's outside of your control. So being able to communicate and being able to have like kind of the foresight of what could possibly go wrong, or like potential hurdles we'll have going into the day. So for example, like my microphone was messing up and my video was messing up, so I would have like totally been like, hey, like this guy is completely unprepared for the broadcast. So I'm gonna completely check his microphone and video, um, just to play on it. But you guys were great.
Yeah.
But I was just I think definitely doing all those things and being able to communicate efficiently and like effectively with like your talent, your all the parties, because what online broadcast is, in a fully remote cloud based broadcast is like you're pulling all of these feeds from all around the world, like for example, our the way we do Apex Legends, like our audio guy is, we're using a certain platform that allows us to pull in a bunch of different um video feeds or audio feeds, and um we need to fax everything out, and then also they kind of operate as their own, everyone who's producing a signal that comes into what the production is, has to be their own engineer. So you have to be able to like communicate like, oh, this seems weird or this seems off, and like where is where is the root cause of this issue and what level is it at. So it's just a lot of like, it's a lot more planning, but I would say that a very well done remote broadcast is actually, I would say, almost at the same level as a live event. Like, you
Mhm.
know, if in of course, like live crowds are amazing, and
Yeah.
like these amazing drip shots are beautiful, but I think in terms of the quality, the story, we're merely just trying to tell the story of what's happening within the match, right? And
Yeah.
to do that justice doesn't take much. You need talent to give their commentary to kind of help drive a story, and then you need to be able to put video signals on screen, and then add music if you got it right, like that
Yeah.
would be phenomenal. But like, you know the ask isn't massive, but
Mhm.
it's just trying to make the best out of the current state of the world.
Yeah, and I imagine working on the normal broadcast has its fair share of unexpected issues. I can only imagine they get sort of amplified in the online space in terms of the amount of unexpected problems that arrives. And for example, one such unexpected problem you might remember in MSI 2017, Shocks and Wolf had an interview that cut off suddenly. I don't know if you remember that particular issue when you were working as a technical director, but you've got Kevin to thank for,
Interesting.
for that issue, one of our
Interesting.
lecturers there. And I'm sure there's going to be the video clip of that one being posted in chat, just in case you wanted to see Kevin
Oh, I'm definitely
rectify
taking on.
all those.
Oh.
But in terms of unexpected issues like that one,
Oh, Kevin. I
indeed,
remember this son.
in terms of unexpected issues like that one, how do you deal with those situations on the fly? And
Yeah.
is it so that much important to have problem solvers that can deal with those issues as they arise?
Yeah, I definitely remember this. I remember having a good laugh about this afterwards. Of like, it's such a I think it's such a honestly, me personally, I think that like these kind of things, it's live, right? Like things are gonna happen and you just have to adapt with it. I know some people they'd like freak out and start yelling and stuff like that, but I think that the most important thing is that you just identify it and be like, what do we want to be? How do we get out of here? Like, what is the most natural way of like coming off of this? Um, oh my god,
Yeah.
yeah, I think at least from my point of view, I
Mhm.
saw it hit the gameplay and I was like,
Yeah.
it's paused there, and I'm like, okay, that's totally fine. We're just gonna come out to the casters and they'll ad lib, right?
Mhm.
So I think that it's something where it happens and like you just have to understand what what do we do that doesn't seem wrong.
Yeah.
And like the most you can do kind of after is kind of just like laugh about it and just understand like we're all human and like things are gonna happen, right? Because like everyone has their one, right? And like sometimes you have three or sometimes you have five, but I mean that's the kind of nature of live broadcast, and that's how people know it's live, is that
Yeah.
some things like that happen. um but I think that it's super funny. I think one of the best things you can do is kind of just you just own up to it, right?
Yeah.
It's just say like, sorry, that was me, my bad, and like hopefully you're working with a good understanding bunch who are just like, dude, don't worry about it, like let's just push forward. And then just gotta be quick and just like for me at least, like I'm in a constant state of like anxious and paranoia almost of like what can go wrong, like how do I fix it, so like I try to be as prepared as possible for anything. But that's kind of how I work around
Well, it's
certain
good
things.
advice. Own up to the mistakes, correct the mistakes as quickly as possible, and then laugh it off afterwards. I think that's a good mantra to have on the production side of things. And just before we head over to the open questions, then from the audience, if you could give one piece of advice to somebody who they really want to be in that LCS control room, they want to be working on these broadcasts, what piece of advice would you give them?
um I would say, I would definitely say, like I kind of mentioned earlier, to put yourself out there and just try to get the experience as much as you can. I think that'll set you on the right path, right? Like even if you aren't working in esports right now, doesn't mean you won't in the future, right? So getting as much experience as you can, and if you need to get paid, for example, because I know that like everyone's like, oh, I got loans I need to pay for.
Mhm.
So like if you need to do work outside of esports, but within your same career path, like whether it's like directing or technical directing or operating graphics or operating tape on like live events, like live sports or whatever. I think that that's super good. They'll set you on the right path. But I think one of the biggest things I can do as an individual, the one of the biggest things I would say to do as an individual is like try to maintain that that love for games. And no matter how much you can become like jaded or burnt out or whatever about a game, is just understand that like we're all having fun, and like everyone just wants to have fun, and um just try to remember why you wanted to get into this in the first place, and like try to keep that passion and drive. I think that that's one of the most things, is that at least for me, like when I first started, like there were so many crushing moments for me where I just felt like I just wanted to give up. I just wanted to go to plan B, right? Like where I was like, there's honestly, I gave it a good shot. I should just do what, like, what was planned for me, what my parents said like was like the smart idea.
Yeah.
There are so many moments like that, but I think to be almost stubborn in your drive and just keep pushing for it, like good things will happen if you just keep pushing for what you want, and just try to maintain the humanity of like, but I'm also working in a field where like, we should be having fun. So have fun, but just stick with it. And I think that there's going to be moments where you'll feel like, I don't want to curse, but you'll feel like
Feel free
it
to.
does it doesn't feel bad, or what, it feels bad, and you want to like just be like, whatever, dude, I give up.
Yeah.
Just stick with it, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice. Not giving up is something that I think you need to have as an aspiring esports person, because it's just so difficult to get into the industry as an outsider that if you're just going to be irritated by your first rejection, then you're not, you're going to face plenty of rejection before you face acceptance. So, heading now then into our open viewer questions, we have our first question, which is from Kevin, our lecturer, and that is, what are your thoughts on Valorant, JD?
um so as a player, I love it. I love the game. Super fun. I played it a bunch. I haven't played as many ranked games recently, but I played a good amount of unrated before it came out because I was busy with work and stuff. But I got a couple of ranks in. I got like 6 ranked games in. I'm in like plat 2, but I'm trying to get a little bit higher just so I have some better street cred. Um, but yeah, I think the game is super fun. I think that there's a lot of critiques about, like, by drawing direct comparisons to other games, but I think that if we all just take a step back and just say, like, this is just a different game with a different set of rules, and like we just need to approach this game like a new game and not take any preconceived ideas of like, is it CS:GO, is it Overwatch, is it Rainbow Six, like just understanding that this is just Valorant and you just
Yeah.
play it and try to learn the systems within there. I think it's a super fun game with a very interesting take on what a tactical shooter is.
Do you think
um
it has what it takes to become a successful esports title?
I think it has like an absurd amount of I think it has like when they were building this game out, I definitely think that they were keeping esports and competitive, at least competitive, within mind, which is like one of the best things that you can do as a developer, within this genre. I think within the tactical shooter genre, I think it's just the I hate to use such casual terms, but like it's just a very sweaty environment of
Yeah.
super high level competitive people who want to win, right?
Yeah.
And to come into it, like I think it was their announcement video. I was actually doing the L10 show, for that, the announcement, when they were talking about all these different things with Valorant. I got chills when they were saying, like, we're releasing the game with on 128, like we're releasing on high tech servers.
Yeah.
We care about these things. We're trying to eliminate Peeker's advantage. I know there's some comments about Peeker's advantage in the game right now, but at least they're forefront about it, right? They're putting effort into saying, like, we're trying to combat these like massive issues that have kind of been plaguing first person shooters for so long. So I think that they came into it like with such great intentions for it to be a esport. The fact that they're already starting to collect data of like what would be a great thing for a spectator client, and they're already making iterations on it right now. I think that they're positioning themselves, especially with Riot's kind of presence within esports. I think that Valorant's positioned in such a good spot to um, really take off when the game actually releases. I think it's crazy to say that it's still in closed beta right now.
Yeah.
And people are already talking about esports and trying to do tournaments, but I think when it actually releases, I think we're gonna see like uh it almost take over within the FPS kind of esports world.
Yeah, and an interesting take on the upcoming game. Our next question then is from Pixelating Tears, and they ask, "What has been your favorite event to work on so far?"
Oh man. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of them that are all kind of like tied in the same area, but I think one of my favorite ones that kind of like left a really big impression on me was when I did Staples Center for the world's opening ceremony. Um, I think it was 2016 or something like that. I think it was 2016.
Hmm.
But it was the world's opening ceremony for like the finals for League of Legends, and just the you could just feel it. Like that was like my first opening ceremony for like that for Worlds, right?
Sure.
So it was a very high pressure, kind of a lot of expectations I was putting on myself. Um, and luckily, I was TDing, so I was technical directing that, so I was on the switcher. Um, and like luckily I had a very experienced director to the left of me, and his name is Jonathan X, and he's phenomenal director, like such a amazing person. um and it was such a pleasure working with him, and like he made me feel so at ease, and he was such a good spirit through that whole process. But that was definitely like the one event where I was like, and it was my first kind of opening ceremony.
Yeah,
So I was like, it meant a lot to me, as I kind of have gone through all these things. I always look back at that one being the one event that was like, damn,
pretty cool.
that was nice.
Enjoying working, liking working on worlds. Our next question is from Bubblegum Lol, and they ask, "Is there any area that you wish you had specialized into instead of what you're doing currently?"
Um, that's an interesting question. I think that in the giant scope of things, I think that I don't think so. I think that there might be like other avenues that I'd be interested in. That I've always kind of been interested in, especially as like a pro player. Like I'd love to be a pro player too. Or like as someone who was like just on the cusp of making it pro, of like being a part of org and being in like a league environment and salary and stuff like that. I think I would have loved to like completely go through and see it. um I think that that was one where I was like, oh, that'd be cool. I would love to try out like a more like kind of feature style within esports. I know that it's like a little bit more difficult, and like that space hasn't been growing out too much. There's like teams that work on features,
Sure.
but there's not like uh can't really do too much within a cinematic world
Yeah.
um for esports. So like that's something I'd be interested in kind of being a part of. Um but I think in terms of live production, I think that I've as if I'm in that role where I can kind of be creative and kind of do that, I'm happy. I think that I'm yeah, as long as I can kind of be creative and like kind of collaborate with others and see something come to life in front of me on a screen, like that's all I really want.
Yeah, indeed. It sounds like you're perfectly placed in the industry at the moment. Now, I might have to apologize for this next question because it's quite complex in nature. But
Yeah.
Spud asks, with the decline of the Overwatch League, what could the broadcast team have done to try and save the esport? Or do you think it's a more complex issue than something the broadcast team could have solved?
Um Yeah, I think that I mean there's a lot of layers to, what's kind of going on with that. There's like, I think that the Overwatch League, they've done such a phenomenal job with the branding,
Mhm.
the broadcast, and like how they push things within the broadcast. I think that there's just it's a whole different, there's so many different things that kind of like led to this moment, right? Like as much as a broadcast can be like absolutely killer, as much as a branding can be absolutely killer, there's only so much you can do because you kind of depend on the game too, right? So whether it's like the game or whether it's other games, right? So it's not just, is it Overwatch's fault? Is it like everyone else within the esports world? There's only so many
Hmm.
games people can play.
Yeah.
Especially to such a degree of like fandom where you would watch, right? So I think that there's so many different aspects to that, but I mean that's my take on it, is like the it's really difficult to hold on to viewership, and it's really difficult to hold on to like super dedicated fandom, because you need everything to go perfectly for you, not just within your control but outside of your control as well.
Yeah.
um so for example, League of Legends has stayed around forever because it's almost cornered the whole viewership of MOBAs. Like, you have Dota, which is very successful, and I think that that also draws plenty of viewership. But I think that between those two different spots, there's not much pulling. There's no Heroes of New Earth,
Yeah.
trying to pull away from League of Legends or Dota. There's none of that, right? Or Heroes of the Storm or things like of
Rest
that
in peace.
nature, right? Yeah, it was a good game. But yeah, I think that those are kind of the two things where it's like you need everything to go perfect. And as much as fun Overwatch is to play and watch, you need everything to go right.
Yeah. Indeed. Next question then is from Atriox, and he asks, I'm assuming this is from the perspective of somebody working in production. After you're doing the volunteer work on the broadcast, or you're running student tournaments, for example, what is the best way for you to present the work that you've done as a production member to future employers?
The best the best way I've seen it, at least, that has been most impressive, but like I'm definitely I'm definitely more of a lazy person, so I haven't done this. But the some of the best kind of thing you can do is share what your work, right? So whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's any kind of like social media, is like share
And
your
by doing
work,
that, I think we
whether
are still on a
it's
steady
a
road to
video
winning the.
of like you in the control room or you at your workstation doing the
Okay, looks
show,
like we
and
may have
kind
had
of
some technical difficulties coming.
showing that in a way where people can see what you're building and see how you're working and see what it looks like. I think those are like very important things to see what you're capable of, and then you just create a reel of like all these different things that you create and how you work in the environment. I think that a lot of hesitancy when it comes to like bringing people into a project is how they meld into a team. So what better way to show them is show them your work and show them how you operate within the actual show. So I think that there's a great video. I can only speak to it, sort of only alluding to it, but there's a great video of the the LEC team in their control room, and it's the shot of them doing their opening ceremony for the split, I believe. And it's a great video, and it got a lot of traction, and it's the way it's composited shows exactly like what's going on within the
Yeah.
control room and what it looks like. And I think that that's like a super valuable thing that you could do with any show, and then you can show what value you bring, um, and how you operate.
Yeah, makes sense. Similar to creating almost like a casting reel of sorts, but in
Yeah.
terms of the production side of things with transitions, or even dealing with those various technical issues. And our next question, which I believe may be our final one, is from Josh LV, and he asks: Is there always a need to have a director and a technical director on a broadcast, or can you scale that down to just one person doing both roles for smaller scale events?
You could totally scale that down. I know that the term vision mixer has been kind of it's kind of a term that people use for someone who directs and also TDs. Um, I think that it's a super viable thing. I think it's almost a very marketable thing as an individual. If you can do both, people see massive value in that. I see plenty of I see plenty of individuals that I've met while working within just the broadcast space as overall, where I've seen them succeed so well because they can market themselves and be like, "Hey, like I'll TD, I'll build, I'll do everything, and I'll direct." Uh, and honestly, if you some of the best directors I've ever met always started as a TD, or vice versa, or they're very knowledgeable within the TD role. Um, so I would say that like it's a super valuable thing to learn and kind of foster. Um, but I would say like yeah, 100% you can scale that down to where the TD is the director, but just know that as a production gets bigger, you'll need to allocate things a little bit differently. Like especially once you start to enter the realm where there's like um multiple feeds, or there's a screen feed, there's a this feed, there's a this feed, and like there's all these different things that you need to manage as on the TD side of things. It kind of takes away what you can bring to the table as a director. So I think that it's just managing both of the ass and how well you want to deliver on certain things, and it all comes down to, I guess, budget in the end.
Hmm.
So uh it's super possible, and I think that in the end, like, you'll be the best TD you'll ever have as a director is potentially yourself, or someone that you've worked with for a very, very, very long time, because like you already know what you want to do. So you can already think about how you're going to do it.
Yeah, indeed. So for anyone out there planning on running those student esports events, you don't need to splash the cash on absolutely every member of production. You can scale it down and merge at least those two roles together. And with that question, JD, that brings us to the end of the broadcast. So all there is left to say is thank you so much for joining me today. I'm sure that well, I know for a fact just from listening to it, there's been a wealth of knowledge that you've imparted onto us as students, and I'm sure it's going to be incredibly useful for people looking to go into a career in esports production. So thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed yourself and had a good time at
I had
least.
fun. This is great. This is great. Yeah, it took a little bit for my brain to start working and the coffee to kick in, but thank you for so much for having me. It really means a lot. I think that it's such a compliment and like a massive thing for you guys to feel like you would want to hear what I have to say. So I mean, I really do appreciate it. I think that um just the only things I have left to say to everyone who's watching is like just stay persistent and stay hungry. And good things will come.
Indeed, put the burger down and stay hungry. So that is going to be all for us for today's episode. A huge thank you to JD again for his time and joining us. Make sure you follow this channel and our Twitter, which is at Insights Esports. That's all one word. I'm sure somebody will be posting that one in the chat for you to click on. And other than that, make sure you keep an eye on that Twitter account where we will announce what the next guest is going to be for this show and when it will be taking place. But until then, everyone, we'll see you next time.